Today, we're talking uranium with the CEO of Sprott Asset Management, John Ciampaglia. But before I get into it, you guys know the drill. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so we keep making more of these videos for y'all. So, John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we've recently become big fans of uranium when we saw the price start to move. And we've noticed that the conversation has changed dramatically since, I guess we could say, maybe September of 2021. Now, obviously, you guys at Sprott have made some big bets or gotten very involved in the uranium space. So I want to start off by just asking you, how much has the sentiment towards uranium changed from, say, 5 years ago to today? And ultimately, why did you guys decide to sort of dive right into the space?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if I were to go back to 2017, 2018, I mean, I think it's fair to say the industry was in dire straits. The price of uranium had fallen to a point where most of the mines around the world became uneconomic and deposits, and we started seeing a slew of different companies shut in some of their top producing assets, like Cameco did with McArthur River. And at that point, it was just it didn't make any sense to pull the pounds out of the ground. And I think the companies did the right thing, which was shut in production, even though that's very difficult to do and very expensive to do. So sentiment, I would say, in 17, 18 was rock bottom. And it wasn't until, I would say, 18 months ago where sentiment started to turn, because a number of people started to connect the dots that this structural supply deficit that we have put ourselves in was not sustainable over the medium and long term, and that there had to be a reset in the industry. Otherwise, there would be a real severe shortage of uranium, and the power plants would be at risk of operation. So as more and more people have figured this out, I think the interest in the category has expanded dramatically. But now it's so much more than the supply deficit. It's way more broad in terms of the issues at heart here, given the world is so fixated right now on not just energy transition, but I would say more so on energy security, which has become front and center since February 24th.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that. We follow it online, and there's just article after article of sort of that changing sentiment towards nuclear power, whether we're talking about Japan, England, even in Germany now, we're starting to see polls that show that the German people are demanding that they get back into nuclear energy, which from our view makes the space tremendously interesting. Now, when we first started placing some of our risk capital into nuclear names, the one thing that we kept hearing was, okay, this is definitely something that can be squeezed in terms of just the spot price of uranium, but is there actual sort of long-term sustainable demand here? Now, do you have any concerns for that this could just sort of be a sort of a short-lived sort of price squeeze from retail investors, or do you think that there's something structural that's much bigger that's going on here?
Yeah, I think uranium and nuclear is part of a much bigger shift going on right now across all energy markets. And the one big knock against uranium is that it's still a small market. When you think about how much uranium is mined every year, about 130 million pounds, the current spot price, I mean, it's tiny compared to, say, the size of the global oil market or nat gas or some of these other commodities. So it's a small market. The related equities, if you take up the cumulative market cap, is quite small as well. I mean, if you could probably buy all 80 publicly traded uranium companies in the world for probably sub $30 billion today. And as we know, there's all kinds of oil and gas companies that trade at multiples of that on a standalone basis. So it's a small market. I would say one of the big challenges we have is that really big institutional money it has a hard time getting involved in the space because it's not very broad, it's not very liquid, and that's just the function of going through a 9-year bear market and a lot of capital being wiped out. It's going to take time to recapitalize the sector, and I think that's the opportunity a lot of investors are seeing. One, on the physical commodity side, because we just need more of it over time, and it's not coming out of the ground at a faster rate. And second of all, a lot of people have identified the need to recapitalize these companies because it's the only way to get these idle mines back online and to actually meet medium and long-term demand. So I think a lot of institutional investors in particular have kind of figured all this out. But it's still very early in the cycle because, while I may have talked to 100 plus institutions over the last 6 or 7 months, there's obviously thousands of institutions that have no idea that, this is not on their radar. But I think everything going on in Europe right now with the energy crisis is really highlighting the need. I mean, today I read the German government said that they were going to fire up their coal plants this summer if they found they needed any extra electricity produced. At the same time, they've got 3 more nuclear power plants to close. So it is kind of confounding what some of these government policies have led to, and some of the issues that they've now created a lot across Europe.
Okay, so I want to dig a little bit deeper into your conversations with institutional investors. So what are the things that they're sort of concerned about? And in terms of talking to institutional investors, how early are most of them in terms of their diligence or their interest? Like, are we in the first or second inning of you guys sort of scrapping together of a larger institutional following? And then again, what are the kind of questions that they're asking you guys about?
Yeah, well, I would say it's there's 2 groups. There's a small group of early stage investors that were at the time highly contrarian and deep value and started building exposure to the sector in 18, 19. And they would probably tell you they were a little early, but they held firm to this whole thesis. And then I would say in the last 12 months, as the sector is become more interesting and there's been more news flow and there's all these other things going on in energy markets where you're getting newer institutions doing homework on the trade. And it's everything from, give me an overview of the uranium market today because I don't know anything about it, but I think it's really interesting what's going on, to can you give me an update on the sector because I haven't invested in it since the last cycle. So you'd have very large institutions tell you, I was involved in 2007, but haven't really been since, or I was involved up until 2011 or whatever. So I find it amazing that there's still a lot of knowledge and research that has to develop, which is why we've been so active in the marketplace in terms of trying to help the marketplace understand how the market works, as well how our physical trust operates, because I think education is really critical. It's an opaque market. It's hard to get information. It's hard to know what's going on in the market. So a lot of institutions reach out to us and say, you guys have grown this trust pretty significantly. You guys have bought, 37 million pounds of uranium since August. You clearly have some insight into what's going on in the landscape, which we do. So we've had a lot of interesting conversations with institutions. And I think the interesting thing is that it's like right around the globe. I can't really point to one type of investor or one geography. It is very global in nature. And I never would have thought it would be as versatile in terms of how it's being applied in different portfolios. Everything from macro funds to ESG funds, energy transition, small cap, contrarian funds, general equity funds. It's the whole gamut in terms of different fund managers and institutions that are interested in this idea right now.
So I'd like to ask you about the physical trust and the decision with I think it was actually the SEC. I've got the filing right in front of me here. So you guys decided that you don't want to pursue that anymore, the NYSE listing. Can you maybe walk us through sort of what the high level issues were? Because it seemed from our vantage point that that would have just been a slam dunk had the physical trust made it on the NYSE, with all the retail traders in the US on, Robinhood and Webull being able to hop in. So why the decision to not pursue it any further?
Well, there's very specific rules for commodity stockpiling funds in the United States.
Okay.
And part of our application, we specifically asked for two exemptions from two listing requirements. And the SEC looked at our application and essentially said, you don't meet the listing requirements. What were those listing requirements specifically? It was related to having an intraday indicative value. And that's basically, as the sponsor, publishing what the value of the basket is every 15 seconds. And second of all, having a redemption mechanism inside the trust to assist with arbitrage. And we don't have a redemption mechanism in the current trust. We don't think one is practical for obvious reasons with uranium. And so that was something we were not willing to entertain. And in terms of the IIV, that's something that's just, a function of the uranium market. So the only way to have a valuable IIV is to have a widely available real-time price for spot uranium. And unfortunately, one does not exist today. Uranium is still moving along its evolutionary curve in terms of its pricing and its transparency. And I think the trust has assisted that development, but we're still not there. So at this point in time, we don't have any plans to go back and reapply because we just can't get over those two obstacles. So it's unfortunate, but just to be clear, we never messaged from the beginning that we thought it was going to be a slam dunk. It was the first time the SEC ever considered one. And I don't want to belittle the success we've had with the TSX listing in both CAD and US, and as well as the OTC listing, which we've uplisted twice since the trust started. So, we've been doing everything we can to basically hedge our bets if the SEC listing didn't go ahead.
Yeah.
So on that
it's been a massive
topic,
success. Go ahead, Jay.
sorry, Steve. On that topic, my assumption when I first saw the North Shore Global Uranium Mining ETF involvement was that basically some pre-planning in the case that you weren't able to get the physical trust on, or is that just part of a broader uranium focus that you guys are working towards?
Yeah, well, it's fair to say we're hugely constructive on uranium medium long term. And that with all of our physical commodity funds, we generally will offer funds that also invest in the corresponding equities. And, as we started talking to people last summer, it became very clear to us that a lot of investors are not just picking one or the other. They usually hold both the physical and the equities in some kind of combination. So it really dawned on us to have, both of those solutions side by side to offer to people. And when North Shore, contacted us and said, I see what you guys have done with Sprott. I've got this fund that I think would be the perfect complement to it. It was $350 million at the time. And we started the process of negotiation to acquire that. And as you can imagine, as the summer went on, the AUM in the fund kept going up and up and up. So it made for a somewhat challenging negotiation, but I'm glad we got it completed. And as of April 25, we reorganized the fund. So, we want to have the two leading funds in the marketplace. That's our goal. They're very complementary to each other. And I think there's roles for both of them to play in a portfolio.
Could you walk us through the types of companies that you guys are targeting for the Sprott Uranium Miners ETF?
Sure. So it's a passively managed fund, which means it tracks an index. So the ETF's job is to track the North Shore index as close as possible. So the prior sponsor of the fund is also the sponsor of that index. Essentially, what that index is trying to do is give you broad exposure to the uranium sector. About 82.5% of it will be invested across the leading producers, which there aren't many. A number of the development companies, and then a whole bunch of junior exploration companies. So you get pretty broad exposure, around 35 equities. And then there are a few companies, including the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust and Yellow Cake, for example, that give you some exposure to the underlying physical commodity. And that physical commodity acts somewhat as a ballast to some of the more volatile, less liquid junior exploration companies. So for people that are trying to invest in a volatile sector, they don't want to do the research with individual companies. The ETF approach, getting a basket through the indexes, is a good way to diversify and place bets all around the table.
Absolutely. Have you guys put out any forecasts, sort of a Sprott, in terms of where you think the price of uranium could be heading over the next few years?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we have an official forecast, but I think it's fair to say we think the price needs to go much higher than where we are today. And the reason we say that with confidence is that if it doesn't go higher, there's no incentive price to either restart idle production or let alone do any greenfield development, which can take easily 12 to 15 years. So if you think about 9 years of shutting in production and not moving any of these projects forward, there's a lot of work to do to get these assets back online. And so the industry is slowly getting back into capital raising mode, which will allow it to invest in its assets and ultimately build new mines. But it's a long process. The environmental process. I mean, I was on a panel last week with the CEO of NextGen, and he was commenting how the company, who has one of the leading uranium deposits in the world, undeveloped, he was commenting about how they're getting ready to upload 10,000 pages of documents as part of their permitting process. Like, people don't understand that these projects take a long time to bring to market. So the supply response will come, but it's going to be very slow. And I think that's what a lot of investors have picked up on, is that this supply deficit that we've had the last few years, which is around 50 million pounds of uranium a year, it just cannot go on forever. And so the price has to go up to a point where things like McArthur River at Cameco can restart. And obviously greenfield projects will need a substantially higher price of uranium in order for them to be financed and built. And, every project's different based on jurisdiction and grade, but, it's fair to say that some of these projects are going to need 70, 80, 90, $100 a pound uranium. Today we're at $46. So we still have a lot of runway to get to a point of greenfield development.
Where are you expecting much of that greenfield development to occur? I mean, in North America, obviously there's big deposits here in Saskatchewan where I am, and a bunch in the US. The problem is, as you allude to with those permit issues, is just the government seems to be working against us. So are there other jurisdictions that you see as potentially up and coming for further development that aren't so restrictive?
Yeah, so Canada is, obviously is world class in terms of its deposit. Canada is also, in our opinion, one of the best mining jurisdictions in the world in terms of safety and oversight. But there's a trade-off there, and that's obviously time to market. So we've got safe, world-class mining operations, but they take longer to bring to market. Obviously countries in Africa, you can get mines built there much faster. And there are obviously a number of uranium deposits in certain African countries. And so there are mines that are in the works there or coming back online. So it really is a jurisdiction by jurisdiction issue. I do think you bring up an interesting point, is that, what we've learned the last couple of years is that whether you're getting a demand shock or a supply shock, the market in capital intensive industries does not move very quickly. Particularly when you go through 10-year bear markets and there's massive underinvestment and all kinds of people leave industries, right? So it's not easy to get these things turned back on. It's not easy to get these projects back online, but it will happen over time. And I think we're in a much better environment in the world. Many governments have kind of figured out that if they don't support development of critical minerals, we're not going to be able to decarbonize, electrify, move to electric vehicles, maintain stable power generation systems, infrastructure, all these things. So governments are slowly, acknowledging that they have to make investments here. And I think that's kind of step one is changing the narrative at the policy level.
Well, John, thanks so much for hopping on here. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat with our audience about everything you guys have going on. We've personally made some bets in the space ever since Sprott jumped in, and we certainly think you guys are onto something, and definitely back your thesis.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, John. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Please comment below. Let us know what you think, where the price of uranium is going, and ultimately how much capital you think could flow into this sector. Also, please like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so we keep making more of these videos for y'all.